In one of the greatest stories of our lifetime, One Piece, there's a place called Tequila Wolf. Mild spoilers for One Piece up to the time skip, by the way. Don't worry, it's nothing crazy. One of our main characters finds herself on this bridge, which seems to stretch on through a near infinite expanse of water. We come to learn that this bridge has been under construction for 700 years at the behest of the world nobles, the highest authority of the world. This is a magnificent achievement, an architectural marvel. Generations of blood, sweat, and tears have seeped into the bridge's very foundation. There has never been a bridge so big. Of course, it begs a few simple questions. Where is this bridge going? Why was it built in the first place? Will it be worth the cost if it eventually reaches its endpoint? Will there be an endpoint? Perhaps civilization will collapse before the bridge reaches wherever it's supposed to go? The story hasn't yet given us those answers, and I'm frankly not sure I want to know. The question is more interesting to me than the answer. 5 years removed from the release of Pokémon Sword and Shield, these games were a wake-up call for many who might not have ever asked the more existential questions about the stability and longevity of Pokémon. I have rarely seen a controversy so fierce surrounding a set of fairly normal Pokémon games. That fascinates me. What does that say about Pokémon as a franchise? Have we gone too far? Have our expectations for the machine outstripped what it was originally designed to achieve? Why are we on Generation 8? How many more generations will there be? What will those look like? What do we want them to look like? Most importantly, does it even matter what we want? Is Pokémon for us, or is it for the machine? Let's suit up and find out as we kick off into the region of Galar. The Galar region is based on the United Kingdom, the place where Xenoblade characters come from, and they do a lot of football. I can't even throw stones right now, as the United States is currently the most fragile glass house that has ever stood. Sword and Shield are a tour of the UK, where you meet a lot of Pokémon which fit under that theme. This is a land host to several different mythologies. The Impidimp line is reminiscent of imps and trolls. Galarian Ponyta and Rapidash are unicorns. Berserker, a new evolution for Meowth, is based on the Vikings which traveled there. Pokemon like Wooloo and Eldegoss represent the quiet and beautiful English countryside. Weezing's new Galarian form is a flashback to the Industrial Revolution that took place years ago, even sporting a top hat and facial hair that would have befit English businessmen at that time. The starters are all reflective of the UK spirit in their own ways. Inteleon is a play on James Bond. Rillaboom's a real beast of a drummer, speaking to the island's rich musical history, but also its tendency to get loud and rowdy, especially surrounding sporting events. Playing off that idea, Cinderace is meant to be a stand-in for professional football players. Starts off young and starry-eyed, then evolves into a form with a sports hoodie as it trains hard, maturing into a full-blown professional with a delicious signature move animation. I used to argue that these were the worst starters, but now that I've gotten over the initial shock of my beautiful baby boy turning into an action movie star, I can't help but appreciate their creativity. Gigantamax Inteleon is really clever, stupid as it might look. A lot of my personal favorites come from Galar. Phalanx is a banger of a design, where 6 entities are controlled by what seems to be a single mind. A play on the Phalanx from Greek mythos, which is also a military tactic. Given the UK's penchant for military might, imperialism, and expansion, it makes sense to have a symbol of that might. Though it does amuse me that it's packed into a bunch of cute little soldiers. Runarigus is an awesome variant of Kofagrigus. Where Kofagrigus was based on sarcophagi, placed in the region based on America, for some reason. Runerigus is based on runestones left behind by Scandinavian Vikings to commemorate the dead. It's the same idea as Kovagrigus, the dead rising out of their burial ground, but now actually derived from the region in a meaningful way. I love how it has to shape itself together, suggesting that its various chunks were pieced together by archaeologists like they would be in our reality. I've made it no secret that Zigzagoon and Linoon are my favorite rodents, and to my continued shock, they were chosen to get regional forms that kick ass, or should I say kiss ass, because these badgers are black and white with a new evolution in Obstagoon designed after the lead singer of British rock band Kiss, Gene Simmons. That's not a joke. This exists, and it's amazing. I don't know who came up with this idea, but thank you so much for putting this ridiculous energy into the world. Genuinely. Zacian and Zamazenta take up the Arthurian legend mantle, representing his mythical weapons. It's said that King Arthur rests at the Isle of Avalon, ready to come to the nation's aid once again when they need him most. Zacian and Zamazenta appear as ghosts in the slumbering Weld, waiting to once again emerge and protect the Galar region, as they did many years ago. They are the region's legendary heroes, fittingly based on wolves, which used to be native to the region before going extinct. The biggest nod to Britain, though, is the region's sports focus. The League Challenge is now a national event broadcasted across the region. Your gym battles take place in giant stadiums with crowds of people cheering you on. You pick a number, get a uniform, and compete against several rivals to become champion. Sword and Shield are about climbing the ladder. You start south of the region and work your way up to the top where you're crowned champion. More than ever before, it's about the thrill of the fight, with Dynamaxing introduced to add a larger-than-life climactic finish to those gym battles. You can really feel how this changes your typical Pokémon playthrough. Routes are shorter and more linear. This was a trend Sun and Moon began, but Sword and Shield take it to the next level. While some of these routes can have optional pathways and secrets, they all must link up to a single exit. The days of secret caves, routes, and cities are over. You are expected to follow a single path to the end. If I had to pick a single aspect of modern Pokémon which I 100% do not like, it would be this. Not only are you guided by the hand, you're never even allowed to veer off the path to begin with, so these pace-breaking text boxes they load you up with feel pointless, further contributing to this feeling that you're on a guided tour rather than a self-made quest. You don't get moments anymore like in Hoenn, where you rock smash through some boulders in Rusturf Tunnel and find yourself back in Rustboro. It's a shame, as I really do love the Galar region. Cities like Modestoke allude to the region's Victorian roots, closer to steampunk in its use of gear-controlled lifts. Ballinley is a gorgeous forest hollow that looks like it came straight out of the fairy tales native to the UK. Hammerlock perfectly captures the British royal heritage, with an extravagant castle at its center and a site that tells of the ancient hero. Winden, meant to resemble London, is a giant city like Castilia or Lumios, but it feels like so much more of a reward to discover as it's the finale of your journey. My favorite city is Circhester. In a region full of blood-pumping spectator sports, of fiery competition to be the best there ever was, sits this serene town in the snow. There's a hot spring here, a hotel, and a famous food joint. The music calms me. Every time I reach this place, I sit and breathe it all in. Sword and Shield's soundtrack really helps to sell all these areas, with its many different instruments and tones. It's not a consistent Sinnoh-esque tranquility, it's more a grab bag where you never know what you're going to get. The Slumbering Weld is a highlight, incorporating the howls of the box legendaries into this mystical piece. It's as if you can hear their echoes from the beyond as you traverse the mist. Even this feels like a remnant of a past where Pokemon games give you much more room to explore of your own volition. In reality, the Slumbering Weld is nothing but a few short paths to follow. We've reached the point where there's not even an equivalent of Victory Road like vast Pony Canyon. You just get a short, random snow route before Winden. Priorities have clearly shifted, and that is a crying shame. Odd as this might sound, then, I don't actually find myself dwelling on this loss of agency all too much. That's probably thanks in part to the removal of random encounters. Now that you can see Pokemon in the tall grass, routes take on a new identity and pace. There's something to be said about the magic of wading through the tall grass and seeing what comes next one by one. That has its own mysterious charm to it. Sword and Shield do retain the rustling grass system for rare Pokemon, but for my money, there's a totally different dopamine hit from wandering through a route and watching them all roam around. Even though I didn't often like how these areas were physically laid out, my eyes were squarely on the Pokemon inhabiting them, as I kept my eyes peeled looking for favorites. It adds this unique feel when you run through a route too, where you have to weave in between the Pokemon to avoid random encounters. Every route, then, was a chance to see even more. As such, I decided it would be prudent to forego team building in these games and connect back with my childhood self. I caught a bunch of Pokemon based on whatever my heart was feeling, and used them at various legs of the journey. Sword and Shield make this more viable with the EXP share finally being phased into the series, mostly balanced around, and giving you a PC box at your fingertips. It felt like I was encouraged to experiment, putting the focus squarely on catching and battling. Systems like this feel tailor-made for the new Wild area, a big hub-like region where you run around and catch Pokemon. Though the area essentially has nothing going on besides the Pokemon running around in it, the area is smartly framed as a side attraction and endgame hub. There are only 1 or 2 cutscenes that play here, until you're back into the League Challenge. It's where you're expected to practice in between those matches, take a breather, make some curry, that sort of thing. It's your League Challenge locker room. In some ways, the area feels at odds next to the typical Pokemon progression. It wants to exude Xenoblade energy in its design, with fully evolved, high-level Pokemon dotting the landscape. Seeing these creatures walk around is a pretty surreal feeling even today, that I get to observe my boy Zigzagoon running in zigzags, and my boy Linoon running in straight lines. It warms my heart. You get fun interactions like Sneasel dashing straight towards you, or Elgyem teleporting away. You have to whistle flying Pokemon down to you, or shake them out of berry trees. Little changes like this go a pretty long way in making them feel like authentic creatures. It also taught me little quirks I'd never have known before, endearing me to new potential favorites. Have you seen this tree, though? Game Freak is lazy. That is probably a sentiment you've heard before if you're an online Pokemon fan. You may have seen this thumbnail before, lurking on your feeds many years ago. This video, and many others this one sparked like a wildfire, correctly observed in the pre-release for Gen 8 that there was something suspicious going on with these new games. The animation for Double Kick was lifted from X and Y, meaning these home console games were reusing animations from the handheld games. It turns the clock back to Pokémon Stadium and Battle Revolution. Oh, how incredible those animations were in titles that are decades old. What gives? It then cherry-picks a bunch of defenses from clearly disgruntled superfans who make arguments that are so incorrect that they basically defeat themselves, before making fun of some wild area animations for a bit, ending with the line, "Don't settle for less, fight for more." This video is a response to news that Sword and Shield would be the first games in the series to cut the national dex. This would mean that you would not be able to catch or transfer up every Pokemon, only those available in the regional dex. It seems to have been spurred by an infamous Nintendo Treehouse with Junichi Masuda, in which they state the Nintendo Switch hardware would allow them to be more expressive with Pokemon than ever before. The clip used in the video lacks context, but this was given as a partial explanation in other interviews.
We already have well over 800 Pokemon species, and there's going to be more added in these games, and now that they're on the Nintendo Switch, we're creating it with much higher fidelity, with higher quality animations.
That was directly from producer Junichi Masuda, or rather from someone live translating his words into English, and people latched onto this explanation like a smoking gun. You can see it in this video, balking at the idea that they'd be claiming to have used the power of the Nintendo Switch. It dug deep to prove that statement false, by showing some reused animations and comparing them to Battle Revolution. It's framed as this gotcha moment, like Game Freak had been caught in the act. In actuality, this was done during a Nintendo Treehouse livestream where the game was being shown off directly, where anyone with a functioning pair of eyeballs could see the quality of the visuals and the animations. They were showing this off to the whole world while saying these things. There was no deception here. It was laid out for everyone to see. More to the point, what people often left out of the discussion were the other reasons Pokémon were being cut, that there were in fact other considerations during development.
But even more than that, it's coming down to the battle system. We're making sure we can keep everything balanced and to give all the Pokémon that appear in the games a chance to shine. We knew at some point we weren't just going to be able to indefinitely keep supporting all of the Pokémon, and we just found that Sword and Shield would probably be a good point to go back and reevaluate what would be the best selection of Pokémon that appeal to the widest audience while keeping into consideration the balance of the battle system.
That's odd. I thought Game Freak were lazy. They're giving this an awful lot of thought for a group of devs who supposedly don't give a fuck. There's some snarkiness here, forgive me. I actually don't disagree with the sentiment that these games are a bit uggo. The wild area doesn't look good, and the DLC areas modeled after it don't look much better. Some of these sites are harrowing. I think a lot of the reaction by the fanbase can be explained by mismatched expectations. Pokémon is already a franchise built by imagination. Those first few generations left a lot up to it. You filled in so many blanks that I'm sure we have all had a thought or two as to what this world and its creatures would look like with modern technology. What if the Pokémon world looked like Breath of the Wild or something comparable? Huge, free, and beautiful? I certainly dreamt something like that up as a kid. So here comes this Pokémon game in a post-Breath of the Wild world. A complete reinvention of open worlds and freedom, and Sword and Shield are not that. They have only barely escaped the confines of the 3DS, and with a few adjustments, wouldn't feel out of place on the handheld. It's yet another set of Pokémon games built under the same tight timetable, with roughly the same amount of core developers, only swimming up the exponentially quickening waterfall of modern game development. That Sword and Shield aimed to be Dynamax versions of the games themselves is proof that they wanted to go bigger and better than they've ever done before. They simply, tragically, could not escape the shackles of their overwhelming success and crumpled under its colossal weight. After all, as long as the games continue to come out at a frequent pace, they're going to make money hand over fist, which essentially defeats most arguments people have against their release schedule before they can even be spoken. Why don't the quality of these games reflect the money that they make? Well, that's how you win the rat race. All across the industry, we hear about how much money is pumped into AAA games, that almost all of them don't make their money back, or only just barely do. The cost of making prestige games is immense. You need exponentially more developers, which all cost more money, and they all need several more years of development time, and because they've already sunk so much money into the project, they need to pump even more into marketing to make sure people actually buy it. Meanwhile, Sword and Shield are developed on a shoestring budget with a relatively small group of developers, and they turn a game around in a year or two. Instant bucket loads of not just money, but profit. There's a big distinction there. That's why Pokémon is the king of capitalism. They pay less to make more. Is that the fault of the artists who continue to try to make something beautiful out of this existential nightmare with what little time and resources they have? Yeah, alright. What about the national decks, though? The promise Pokémon made that you would be able to catch every Pokémon and transfer them up through all of the games was broken right here. That sucks. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't suck. Yet as someone who champions black and white, I also don't really know that Dexit is something that affects me much at all. Catching every Pokémon is an activity that ceased to be exciting past the first couple generations and has only become less feasible the higher that number goes. Sword and Shield set the number of existing Pokémon at just shy of 900. It was inevitable. if not these games, then some future one. I have also never really cared much about transferring Pokémon up. I replay the games so often that I've pretty much gotten used to the idea that the pals I ran through the games with will mostly exist in my memories. I keep some of them in Pokémon Home, but for the most part, I don't even remember they're in there. I do it so I can complete these new regional dexes faster for the shiny charm. I suppose the stories I get to tell about the teams I craft are more important to me than the pixels themselves. It's interesting that the National Dex took up so much of the conversational spotlight. This is the first Dex in quite a while I completed. The wild area's visuals might be lackluster, but collecting is so much more efficient and fun when you can roll for a ton of them at once in this mega collection of routes, using your eyes to spot the ones you need. It's a much more active hunt, with a major social edition in max raid dens. It's a little more difficult to find active players these days, but I spend hours with friends catching Pokémon in these raid dens, turning encounters into cooperative boss fights with a whole host of rewards like rare candies, TMs, and sometimes hidden abilities. I find the art of catching Pokémon these days is just a little tedious. Weaken them, throw up a status condition, and chuck the ball until they're caught. Max raids offer a more exciting alternative, asking you to defeat the super rare, strong Pokémon you're after before you can get your hands on it. Some of these higher difficulties are no joke either, encouraging the use of moves and abilities you would only ever see in double battles. Those CPU-controlled allies you're stuck with offline are more of a liability the higher your level, since you need to break through multiple waves of health bars and they refuse to Dynamax when it's their turn. Coordination with other players is almost mandatory. It's one of the boldest new multiplayer features we've seen since the GTS. If you find a really rare den, you can call up a friend or two and you all get a chance to catch it together. That was what pushed me to complete the decks all those years ago, while I toyed around with competitive teams to take into the battle tower thanks to the barrier for entry being so low now. Though we have undeniably lost a lot in the transition to the Switch, we've also gained a lot of novel new features. I don't think it's fair to say Game Freak are lazy after what they were able to accomplish in such a short amount of time without any extensions to account for the increased development scope. For better or worse, it's hard to imagine Sword and Shield working quite as well on the 3DS, even if it looks like it could have been on it. And I suppose that's a compliment of some kind. Alright then, wait a minute. What about the DLC they had the audacity to release? Right. The expansion pass is a replacement for a third version, in a sense. It's a little more expensive than a third version, but you also don't have to play through an entire game again, which is nice. Still not exactly thrilled by the pricing, or how you can only buy DLC for one version, but that is a battle I will never win. For as long as Pokémon is the hottest drug on the market, they're gonna charge beyond a premium. It's interesting they've toyed around with the two-version thing this time, giving players unique gym leaders and a different rival character for the first DLC. It's a neat way to play into those campy version wars we do every generation, and alter everyone's experience ever so slightly. Right. Sorry, I forgot. The fact that they release multiple versions is inherently evil, and now at full price, there shouldn't be two versions at all. Nothing interesting comes from that. Right. The DLC expansions are built like the Wild Area. The Isle of Armor is a tropical island where Sharpedo lock onto you like heat-seeking missiles, and you get to see a 2-scale Wailord out in the distance. People complained about Wailord's real size long enough that they finally did it, the Mad Lads. But it shrinks in battles. Wow, that completely ruins the whole attempt. All because Game Freak are so damn lazy. Right. The Crown Tundra looks to emulate a more rural village in the snow where you revive farming customs surrounding a dead god and hunt for new legendaries. They differ from the Wild Area in that they have stories to follow, giving these open areas more direction. The Isle of Armor is a fun little story where you raise a cub fu into a martial arts master. The progression of the story isn't terribly exciting. They mostly have you running around the map collecting mushrooms and wrangling slowpoke. You're clearly meant to interact with the island's raid dens, items, and Pokémon more than you're meant to spend time with the narrative, and that's a philosophy which holds true for Crown Tundra as well. This more hands-off approach is a smart one, since it gives you a lot of freedom to approach whatever you want. Once you meet Peony in Crown Tundra, you're introduced to max raid battles, and then he gives you all of your quest lines to pursue legendary Pokémon across the region. You can do those missions in any order, or not at all. I had a lot more fun exploring Crown Tundra since the legendary Pokémon lying in wait felt like more substantial rewards than the Isle of Armor, where you ran around 4 areas constantly for max mushrooms. I love the Galar forms of the Cantonian birds, and being forced to chase them down, showcasing each bird's unique behaviors, is a much more interesting spin on the idea of roaming legendaries. I do wish they'd gone a bit farther with this idea. It's fun to have the Reggies back alongside 2 new ones based on the electric and dragon typings, but it's unfortunate that the puzzles you need to solve are all spelled out to you. It's trying to call back to the cryptic Braille of Emerald without any of the bite. It's so much more exciting to collect these monsters when you have to find them, suss out their location. Really, that's the strength of having an open world Pokemon that these expansions are desperately trying to exploit. If you've learned anything in this video, though, it's that the amount of legendary Pokemon increases with each game, and if they're all going to come back, they can't all have fun puzzles to solve. That would take time and resources this team clearly does not have. They'd rather pour that attention into the story of Calyrex, the new legendary, exploring how this farming village's cultural traditions have faded from the minds of all but its eldest citizens, becoming nothing more than a fairy tale. The Creation Trio? They're hanging out in the random mountain next door. Why? Nobody really knows. But hey, max raid battles are really fun, so I'll give them a pass. This is the kind of feature I wish more Pokemon post-games had. It functions a lot like the battle facilities of old, which gave you rental Pokemon, except in this case, you use those Pokemon along with some friends or CPU-controlled allies to defeat several raid dens in a row with a boss fight against a random legendary at the end. This is similar to the Ultra Space wormholes from Ultra Sun and Moon, which were fun in their own way, but as someone who prefers features like the Battle Factory, this is a mode I care much more about. I love being thrown a random Pokemon and chucked into a roguelike. Catching Dynamax Pokemon will give you or your allies a chance to swap their current Pokemon with the one you defeated, and there are various events along the way which heal you, offer you a wonder trade, or give you an item. It's like baby's first Slay the Spire. I spent a good third of my overall playtime in these games exclusively on this mode. It's close to being as fun as many of my other favorite post-game attractions. Maybe not as lovingly handcrafted as the Pokemon World Tournament, but it's essentially the closest we've come to an official Pokemon roguelike. More on that later, by the way. Stick around if you like Pokerogue. That's a pretty big plus in a post-game that is often rather monotonous. The main game's post-adventure wraps up Hop's character arc nicely, but the path to that development is pretty horrible. I hope you enjoy running around and doing pointless max raid battles. That's all you really get to do, besides the battle tower. I spent so much time in the wild area anyway, finishing out the decks and hanging out with friends. I think that's simply the transition these games are attempting to make, to resemble MMOs with single-player campaigns more than single-player games. It's an especially tantalizing proposition when moving to the Nintendo Switch, which revitalized local co-op. It makes more business sense to pour all of that additional dev time into DLC expansions anyway, even if it upsets me to admit. Evidently, that's a pill most vocal Pokemon fans are unwilling to swallow. That's fair enough. But in that refusal, there can exist a sense of resentment that seems pointless. Almost always in situations like this, fans will get mad and scream about DLC or whatever else they don't like. Maybe the thought is that screaming loud enough will cause it to go away. But the reality is, these things are happening because they currently sell. There is no one to be angry at. Everyone involved is doing their job successfully. That means this anger has nowhere to be directed, other than perhaps at the people who continue to buy Pokémon games. If only people stopped buying them, we would be able to restore the purity of Pokémon, right? As if most people playing the games even care about any of this to begin with? As if it's wrong for people to continue to enjoy Pokémon for reasons you cannot understand? I mean, if I can be truthful, I don't really care all that much. If I wasn't out here writing about games, I don't think I would even acknowledge any of this stuff for more than a few minutes. It'd be, that sucks, and then I would move on and think about the things I actually care about from the video game I am currently playing. This playthrough, I ran into a full odds shiny Dottler, and I smiled like I was a kid again. Paraded around a purple Orbeetle named Zim, and grinded max mushrooms for its Gigantamax form. That form doesn't even really do anything except make it look cool when Dynamaxing. Nevertheless, I did the thing I explicitly stated I disliked doing, and ran around looking for max mushrooms. It was annoying, but in the end, I got my giant purple UFO bug. My reasons for continuing to enjoy this formulaic structure might be perceived as shallow, but I don't really care. I don't need my opinion of a video game to be anything more than special to me. I just happen to share mine with all of you. On the internet, every opinion has to be a movement. This anger at nobody needs meaning. So maybe if we all organize and yell loud enough, we can defeat evil. Look, I hate to be the one to say this, but it's not going away. It doesn't matter how hard you scream. It doesn't matter what you say. Businesses are built to go where the money goes. If you've got a good thing like this going, rule number 1 is to not fuck that up. Whatever it takes. Unless, of course, you're willing to take a look at the systems which perpetuate these incentives and lines of thought. Judging by the comments on my X and Y video, though, that is an impossibility. We can rule that one out. It's tough. I think I'm just not built for this kind of nasty behavior. Unfortunately, I have to mold myself into the kind of person who can deal with it, since my job is to contribute to that discourse in a lot of ways. To continue to write about Pokémon in any meaningful way means to address, even externally, how the franchise has developed and changed over time, using my perspective wherever it applies. It's fitting, then, that whenever I step up to write about these games, my brain is never able to step away from the broad reaction to them. At the time, it completely took over any and all conversation about the games themselves. In this specific case, it was almost impossible for me to see anyone actually talk about the DLC, other than to parrot for the 50th time that this company makes $1 billion, why are they selling overpriced DLC instead of finishing their games? Oh man, how lazy. We cannot simply be normal, can we? I can't just roll in and say that I liked parts of the DLC even if a big chunk of it felt pretty aimless. I can't say that Dynamax Adventures was one of the best times I ever had playing Pokemon because, this DLC should never have been sold. Game Freak are a bunch of greedy hacks. Like, can we just stop? Can I stop seeing this, please? Can we be decent human beings? Just talk to each other about art instead of participating in this stupid damn charade? Can I talk to you like a normal person? Can you just tell me the things you didn't like without you needing to be above everything to try to stop a company from doing the thing it was literally designed to do? I guarantee that the level of positivity I have shown towards Sword and Shield today will yield comments calling me a corporate shill because I've decided to pour my energy into things other than yelling at a video game company for doing their job correctly and sacrificing the artistic merits of Pokemon via the guidelines set in place by capitalism. It's self-defeating. I don't like any of this shit either. I wish Game Freak had more time to fully realize these kinda cool ideas. I don't know how anyone could come to the conclusion that the devs are lazy, and that's how we ended up in this situation? Genuinely, what the fuck? Where does that line of reasoning come from? No, the reason this is happening is that Pokemon is a perpetual money-printing machine that no one in their right mind would ever slow down for any reason. Especially not to give artists more time to create. How does that convert to profit? You cannot get upset at them for that. Unless, maybe you do recognize there's a larger force here that might be flawed. Perhaps Pokemon keeps building for some reason. We might want to ask ourselves why they started building this bridge and where it might be going. What does it mean to be great? The Galar region has a big sports angle. It's cute. Your trainer card's converted into a baseball card you can customize, and you get to collect them from various different rivals and gym leaders. They have cool art on them, as well as bits of lore to fill out their backstories. It's not as prevalent these days, but you could collect these trainer cards from other players after battling them, and that might be my favorite part of the system overall. You get to roleplay being the best trainer there ever was on the biggest spotlight there ever was. Fame, fortune, and tantalizing power. There's a literal implementation of that idea in Dynamaxing, where certain battles allow you to kaiju up one of your Pokemon for a few turns, doubling its health and letting it unleash powerful moves that change the weather, stats, or terrain. It's this generation's gimmick, and feels like a smart fusion of Mega Evolution and Z moves. Dynamaxing places a limitation on the duration of the form and where you're allowed to use it. Gym battles are one such place, and it's been incorporated into the League Challenge officially, so they all do it. Since it only lasts 3 turns, and you get one shot at using it to turn the tide, it serves as an effective tension builder for what are the coolest gym battles in the series. Even your first gym battle feels like this larger-than-life event. It cuts to one of those snappy sports channel transitions, framing your viewpoint as what's currently being seen on TV. You walk into this enormous stage, a roaring crowd ready to greet you as you size up your opponent. You take your places, and a killer track starts playing that gets the blood pumping like nothing else. It's actually a dynamic track, changing to be muffled when one of your Pokemon's knocked out, and to incorporate the cheers of the crowd once you push the leader to their last Pokemon. As can often happen in these battles, if you both wait to Dynamax until the very end, you're suddenly in a kaiju battle like something out of Godzilla. Did you know Ken Sugimori's designs were modeled after kaiju? It's a fun full circle mechanic. In general, this intense focus on battling aligns its spirit more closely with Gen 1 in a way that feels more meaningful than chucking in a bunch of references. Those still exist, of course. The champion uses a Gigantamax form Charizard, and in a move very similar to X and Y, the other Cantonian starters also get Gigantamax forms. Unlike those games, though, I believe this is meant to evoke an intentional return to simplicity. Team Rocket in Red and Blue were sideshows. You run in and dismantle their operation with the same energy you used to go out and catch a Snorlax. That is to say, there was very little value placed on it inherently. It was just another activity you partook in during your journey through Kanto. Battling Team Yell or Eternatus, likewise, is given very little focus. In fact, during various points in your journey, characters like Leon will go deal with stuff for you, telling you to continue focusing on your adventure. Team Yell's a play on toxic fan culture, with this group of rowdy fans causing trouble across the region, unleashing their passion for Marnie, one of your rivals, as they cheer her on at the expense of everyone else. They might as well not exist as anything more than a joke, eventually being wrapped straight back into the gym challenge through a clever twist. This places the energy of your playthrough into your competitors. All 3 of your rivals are gunning for the same crown that you are, and they each get their own theme which acts as their hype song. A lot like Blue, you take these rival battles all the way to the top, getting an ultimate final battle with all of them. These battles have a thrill to them thanks to this infectious, adrenaline-fueled energy. Even that first battle against Milo gets a bit of spice injected into it when he Dynamaxes his Eldegoss. Each major character has their own way of throwing their Pokeball, as well as a unique way of chucking their Dynamax ball. Though many of them don't ultimately contribute much outside of being obstacles, the lax nature of the plot means they don't really need to. As far as you're concerned, they really are obstacles in your path. Anything they have to show for themselves as characters will be shown in the heat of battle with those stylish animations, and whatever you can glean from their teams or league cards. They're not particularly challenging gym leaders, and in that sense, I do wish some of them put up more of a fight. Still, Dynamaxing does let them get away with a few picks they wouldn't have gotten otherwise, And the fact that they use Gigantamax forms for their aces makes those Pokemon feel unique to them. Even with underpowered teams, their ability to Dynamax can sometimes turn the tide. Kabu is an older gym leader who's gone through ups and downs in his career, but has never let go of that fiery spirit. He's adopted Will-O-Wisp as a general strategy, encouraging everyone in his league card to keep experimenting with moves and abilities to keep that passion alive. His Centiskorch is the perfect ace, resembling an insect that's crafty, quick, and difficult to pin down while it blazes at insane temperatures. Opal has a cute team aping off the idea that she is definitely modeled after the Queen. Her ace turns into a giant cake and she oozes the embodiment of the British upper class. She's also a troll, asking you questions that have no correct answer. I love her. Piers is my favorite. Not only is he the first Dark-type gym leader, he's also a punk rocker and refuses to use Dynamax. Instead of picking an ace, he deliberately goes out of his way to call out each of his Pokemon and their unique abilities. You'd think he'd end on Obstagoon, I mean, look at him. Instead he ends on Skuntank, and I love that commitment to sticking his finger up at the league, doing things his own way. The fact that Piers and Team Yell broadly represent the punk rock movement of the 70s, and in this title openly protest the biggest institution in the Galar region by refusing to move to another city with a power spot, collapsing the population and economy of their city, well, I'm reading too much into that. Sword and Shield don't have anything like that going on in the text, surely. Anyway, Sword and Shield have some interesting things to say about greatness, history, and ego. Your primary rival, Hop, is the little brother to the region's champion, Leon. This places a lot of pressure on Hop to perform, and he is consistently tested at every leg of his journey. He tries to emulate his brother's style of aggressive battling. Supposedly, he even tried to emulate the way in which Leon throws his Pokeball, unsuccessfully. Admiration for role models is a trait Hop shares with Bede, who looks up to Chairman Rose. I think it says a lot about Rose that Bede is a smug, arrogant prick who defiles public property in Rose's name, but we'll get to him later. These role models are healthy, but only when you don't forget that they are as human as you are. Placing these figures on unreachable pedestals means, of course, that you've set impossible expectations for yourself. And the thing about sports is, your sense of self-worth is very difficult to pry away from your success. No matter how good you are, in battling there is always a winner and a loser. In a huge tournament, there can only be a single champion standing atop every competitor. That is a lot of loss. If you think about it, as the player, you come in and single-handedly crush everyone's dreams. It's not personal, of course. I don't want to trample over Hop's efforts to be like his brother, or Marnie's earnest shot to win for Team Yell and her brother. Yet, there can only be one, and I'm gonna see those credits. You might notice that is a concept antithetical to Pokémon itself. It's a world built on love and connection. You collect tons of different Pokémon and connect with other trainers all over the world. Connection is power, Pokémon says, in the same breath that it crowns an individual champion forged in the fires of other people's broken dreams. I suppose this kind of friction has always been at the heart of the franchise. Every game has a championship bout, and every game stresses the importance of companionship. Sword and Shield are maybe the first time this contradiction was meaningfully explored, and it does so using a character I hate with all of my being. Chairman Rose is a rich, narcissistic, delusional, sorry excuse for a man that I have despised since these games released. It began with the realization that Chairman Rose was trying to solve an energy crisis overnight that wasn't going to become a problem for another 1,000 years. He can't even conceive of the idea that Leon doesn't want to help him deal with Eternatus right that second, choosing instead to finish out the championship bout first. Leon even agrees to do it, as long as Rose waits until the battle is done. A single day. That is too much for Chairman Rose, who announces on a live broadcast in the middle of the most important match of your life to coerce Leon publicly to help him out anyway. To solve a problem, may I remind, with a 1,000-year date of urgency. That was when it began. That is when the seed of hatred started growing. How the hell do you botch a villain this badly? To attempt to dress up one of the most obvious twists of all time by giving him one of the most nonsensical motivations of all time? I just couldn't make sense of any of it. Why was Rose given this epic orchestral chanting in the opening of his theme, where he stares down at his Pokeball as if lamenting what he's about to do, with the knowledge that it's unfortunately necessary? Oh, what a complex villain. Except he isn't. He's unhinged. Again, Galar will run out of energy in 1,000 years. Do you know how long that is? Do you know what was happening in history 1,000 years ago? The Vikings left Scandinavia for Canada. The plot of fucking Vinland Saga. And this motherfucker cannot wait a single day. They try to set it up as this reasonable argument where Rose is simply being proactive, trying to nip this problem in the bud as soon as possible. Based climate activist, right? They give him this larger-than-life operatic theme like he's some tragic villain just stepping up to do what no one else is willing to. Except that isn't true at all. He's crazy. If he waited one more day, may I remind, stress, one more day, Leon would help him. For years, I would describe Rose as one of the worst characters Game Freak had ever created. I would preach this truth to anyone that would listen. I am Chairman Rose's #1 hater. The mere mention of Rose during a stream would spark a 10-minute long tirade about how stupid he is and how much I hated him. Somewhere along the way, that hatred transformed. I happened upon the man's league card, which revealed that he had come in second place during his own league challenge. In the Sword and Shield DLC, Crown Tundra, you meet Rose's brother Peony, and although not much is revealed about their evidently cagey sibling relationship, there is one other thing we learn about Peony, that he used to be champion. Yet, we find ourselves in a present day where Chairman Rose owns the league, sitting above everyone else, while Peony left to go gallivanting in the snowy mountains with his daughter. How did that reversal occur? And why does it feel so similar to another sibling dynamic? These seemingly unrelated facts put everything about these characters and this region into a new context. Consider that in these games, the first person you see is Chairman Rose, not the region's professor. He has usurped even that role in his effort to be the most important person. He ushers you into the region. You're sure to be informed at various points about how important his efforts are to sustaining the region's energy, and he makes sure to establish a relationship with you when you start drawing crowds of your own. After all, should you be the one to finally dethrone Leon, he needs to make sure he owns you too. I've always found it cute that Leon's hat has a crown on it. In the region with kings and queens, Leon is the king of the Galar region. Isn't it interesting, then, that Chairman Rose effectively owns the king? That he stands above royalty? It was so simple once I realized that Sword and Shield are partly about battling ego. Chairman Rose lost his battle long ago when he failed to become champion. He's been compensating ever since. I'm willing to sink a level deeper. Chairman Rose wants to be the legendary hero, or at least he wants to create one. There's an idea penned by Thomas Carlyle that history's greatest achievements are the result of great men. In a lecture titled The Hero as Divinity, Odin, Paganism, Scandinavian Mythology, he states,
"Universal history, the history of what man has accomplished in this world, is at bottom the history of the great men who have worked here. They were the leaders of men, these great ones, the modelers, patterns, and, in a wide sense, creators of whatsoever the general mass of men contrive to do or to attain. All things that we see standing accomplished in the world are properly the outer material result, the practical realization and embodiment of thoughts that dwelt in the great men sent into the world. the soul of the whole world's history, it may justly be considered, were the history of these.
Men like Shakespeare, Rousseau, Napoleon, and even mythological figures like Odin, or dare I say, King Arthur, were born geniuses who changed the world, according to this. They immortalized themselves as great men of history. These days, it's difficult not to see great men everywhere. Billionaire CEOs who want to be recognized for their life-changing accomplishments, or who brute force their way into the limelight, perhaps becoming President of the United States. Too soon? Unfortunately, history will remember these great men. They will live forever in the minds of future generations because they were lucky enough to make a bunch of money from whatever family dynasty they were born into. Or maybe they were just chosen by the sword and the stone. That's who Chairman Rose is, or at least it's who he wants to be. He must be a great man of history. He must save the world. He must be the most important person in Galar. Losing the Galar Championship was such a blow to his ego that he gained ownership of it, placing him above all of it by technicality, above his own brother, perhaps. Then, following what the region knew to be true, that a single figure saved the region during the darkest day, Rose could not find a similar problem to solve within his lifetime, so he looked ahead, 1,000 years into the future, to find a problem he could somehow warp into an emergency that he could solve in his lifetime. He had Leon, the strongest trainer he had ever seen, and released Eternatus with the confidence that Leon would step up and become the legendary hero. Thus, it was not only a fractured ego, but an obfuscation of true history, which led to the darkest day repeating itself. For as we come to discover, there were two heroes that saved the region. In the present day, those two heroes weren't champions at all. Leon, the strongest trainer in the region, couldn't do it, but they could. They rose above their ego, worked together, and saved the region. If you were around for the release of these games, you might be aware of the Game Freak Lied hashtag. This was started in response to a supposed lie that Game Freak partly cut the national decks in order to lighten the load of remaking all the models. Well, my dear viewer, it was found that all of the models share the same wireframes as the ones used in X and Y and Sun and Moon, meaning they lied. If you search this hashtag, you'll come across dozens of threads from supposed experts breaking down in great detail why this was a lie. It was a pretty big movement at the time, and it lit the fanbase on fire. So yeah, open and shut case, right? Game Freak lied, they're lazy hacks, and we can never trust those bastards again. Well, not exactly. Firstly, this is a translation of a Japanese sentence into English. We are translating a language based primarily on context, where words have so many different meanings that it's difficult to draw specific conclusions. Even then, there are tons of threads certain that the terminology used here refers to the models being remade. They obviously could not have meant anything else when speaking to lay people about modeling, except, finally, after hours of searching, I came across another thread about how you would have to redo the textures if Sword and Shield were on a new engine, meaning, in a literal sense, they would have to remake them. Even if they had the wireframes in place, they simply could not inject the models they already had, which means they didn't lie. People drew conclusions based on vague terminology. But it doesn't matter anymore. The damage of that incident is already done, as is the perception of the person who said it, true or not. It has been lost to time, and there's simply no helping that. I find it distressing how volatile this fan base can be, how movements can spring up around a few words from an interview that may or may not even mean the thing they're upset about, how people will fixate on minutiae I can't be asked to give even a single remote fuck about, which to be fair is entirely within their right. I praise and complain about small details in games all the time. I think it's really the attitude that crushes me, that we need to be on opposing teams. To criticize Pokémon is to also drag down the people who made it into the mud, insulting their competence and assuming the worst. There's this compulsion to be above the games we play and the people who gave them to us that I have never, ever understood. Though, the more I observe vocal gamers at large, it's a pretty broad sense of entitlement and disconnect from the human beings who develop the works that we love. It's challenging to exist in a space where the popular thing to do is to treat game developers like subhuman wretches who need to listen to their fans who obviously know what's right. All of this over a game where you had to play with 400 of your shiny new toys instead of 900, and the trees kind of look like shit. I suppose that was enough to completely disregard anything it was attempting to do. Obviously, the work is completely useless if it isn't living up to whatever potential exists in the imagination of superfans who have never worked on a video game in their life. The larger the fan base, the more toxic that mindset becomes, and we hit a tipping point with Sword and Shield, in more ways than one.
Being on the Nintendo Switch, I wanted to really challenge myself to create the greatest Pokemon experience yet using all the hardware power we didn't have before. I've been to the UK on trips, and I just get a kind of sense of strength and greatness from the region, the home of the Industrial Revolution and all these people trying to aim for greatness. We translated some of that feeling into the Galar region.
I think about little details, like how you and your Pokemon who enter the Hall of Fame end up on the title screen after the credits, your victory forever memorialized. I think about how they got Toby Fox to compose a track for the Battle Tower. Someone on the team was so touched by Toby Fox's work that they had to get him on the next game. The ideal Pokemon will always be immaterial and just out of reach, because Pokemon is not fully ours. It springs from the minds of clearly passionate, hardworking artists who love the same things we do and want to make something meaningful. They're doing the best they can within a system designed to suck away creativity, leaving us with product. As long as Game Freak listen to the fans who want to be listened to, I guess, that means they are making a good product. One of the reasons I didn't appreciate the story for so long is due to being convinced pre-release that it was going to go a different way. I was all but certain that Chairman Rose was going to be working with Leon to fix matches in his favor, and that was going to be the central conflict. I was so married to this theory that I couldn't help but compare what we actually got to what I had created in my head. That is the predominant sentiment in so much discussion these days. This thing is not exactly what I imagined or thought it would be, therefore it is worthless. And that's such a shame, as that exact mindset is the reason it took me so long to simply engage with Sword and Shield on their own terms. That does not mean you have to like Sword and Shield. I don't even love them. It's probably my favorite of the 3D games I've covered, but even I don't really like that the more adventurous, immersive elements of the series have seemingly vanished. It's a pretty huge blow. I simply feel that we can continue to be scathing and poignant in our criticisms without bringing the people who labored over it into the mix as punching bags. My respect for Game Freak has only grown the more they seem to fail in the eyes of gamers. I can see what they were trying to do here, and even if it needed more time in the oven, Sword and Shield is what we were ultimately left with. For better or worse, it was yet another Pokemon game, making bold changes and frustrating concessions, just as they did trying to cram Red and Blue onto the Game Boy, brushing up against every bug you could ever imagine. Pokemon is nothing if not agonizingly consistent. Sword and Shield might not be my favorite game in the series, but it does have arguably one of my favorite moments. The battle against Champion Leon is extraordinary. It has all the strengths of the journey thus far. Huge stadium, roaring crowd, blood-pumping anticipation. Then the music starts playing. A heartfelt remix of the Hall of Fame theme, fit with the cheers of the crowd. This is what the whole game has been building up to. This is your moment. Ever since the first games, the championship bout has felt like an aspect of Pokemon that has very rarely been meaningfully built upon in an emotional sense. There have been twists, Team Plasma taking over and fighting Kukui in Alola's first ever league. Sword and Shield aren't a last-minute twist, though. They've injected most of their narrative momentum into the League Challenge. Not since Red and Blue has the championship match felt more important than whatever threat the legendary or evil team's cooking up. It's your moment. You and your Pokemon squaring up against Aegislash, Dragapult, Haxorus, Charizard, and 2 Pokemon that are decided by your starter choice. A rival tradition. Though you don't fight him until the end, he is one of your rivals. His specter looms over you at every leg of your climb. He stands atop the mountain you must scale. It's one of the most thrilling back and forths I've had in a Pokemon game, no matter the team I've built. The spectacle of it all, the heightened emotions, all of it is worthy of being considered a moment these games only could have pulled off on a home console. Even if the rest of the game struggles to keep up with that momentum, the spirit is alive and well. Beating Leon remains one of the most cathartic feelings in any of these games, and it's a poetic way to end what I suppose we can now call classic Pokemon. Lazy doesn't make something like this. It just doesn't. Though for many that old style of Pokemon was well and truly gone before these games, this was indeed the last time it would ever be attempted. From this point, the series would soar in a new direction, to be met with its own struggles and controversies. That, too, in a way, marks the end of this series retrospective. Don't get it twisted, I will continue to cover Pokemon. I don't think I'll ever escape the franchise, and I have so much to say about the remakes, the Mystery Dungeon games, Legends Arceus, and especially Scarlet and Violet. Those will still be coming. But this is the end of the somewhat rigid structure I've tried my best to uphold through the years. In truth, adhering to this structure for the sake of consistency and parity has been a struggle. But it was also one of my goals from the outset. I wanted these to be a big, long series of videos that rhyme with each other, much like the games do. Now that the games themselves are starting to step away from that, I think my videos on them can too. The next time I cover Pokemon, let's get a little more experimental. Sincerely, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy what comes next. If you can't wait and, like me, lament the absence of the Game Corner in modern Pokemon games, you might be interested in a video about the blurry intersection between video games and gambling, which is exclusive to Nebula. It wouldn't have made much sense to put on YouTube, but Nebula is the perfect place for deeper dives like this. Here's a snippet. Gambling is a vice that has been with humankind since as far back as we can reasonably see. The idea of putting something of value at stake, to risk something precious to you in the hopes of obtaining even more, is apparently a timeless desire. If you like what you hear, I have several other exclusive videos talking about games like Astrobot, Hi-Fi Rush, and TCG Pocket. I plan to make many more. Other creators like Jacob Galar are also part of the service. He recently released an amazing exclusive video about Peggle, PopCap, and mobile games at large as part of the Nebula Plus brand of content. It's an amazing retrospective on the history of the App Store and how its games have changed over time. It also shines a spotlight on a brilliant little indie roguelike called Peglin. It's built much like his usual style of videos, simply exclusive to Nebula. You can watch this and those other videos I mentioned exclusively over on Nebula. No matter where you look, Nebula has fun stuff to watch. Their originals are awesome. Lindsay Ellis made a nearly hour-long, lovingly crafted retrospective on Jurassic Park for its 30th birthday. If you have even a passing interest in the film, this is a fantastic breakdown of the history, as well as a look at the lesser-known book it was loosely inspired by. I highly recommend sitting down and watching this wild ride, and many others. I can vouch for their quality and originality. That's why I am proud to be part of Nebula, a streaming service delivering exciting new artistic works. If you're looking to check out what the site has to offer, you can use my link below to check out my channel, which will have every video I release on YouTube, as well as my exclusive videos. Using my link, you'll get 40% off a yearly plan, which shakes out to $36 a year or $3 a month. You could also choose a monthly plan at $6 a month, or go for a lifetime plan for $300. That's right, you'll get access to Nebula for life. All of this using my link below. New paid subscribers also receive guest passes to give out to others, so if you end up loving it, you can invite friends and family to check it out free of charge. No credit card information required. And for those of you that want to share everything Nebula has to offer with your family and friends, Nebula is now offering annual gift cards. Use the link gift.nebula.tv/KingK to give a year of Nebula to a friend for just $36. I think you'll all really enjoy what Nebula has to offer if you give it an honest chance. It's a bright beacon of creative hope in an increasingly dark and stormy independent creator landscape. So go check it out now at nebula.tv/KingK, and I'll see you there.